This hospital has seen countless emergencies, but none as disturbing as what happened in room 306. Built over 50 years ago, its walls have witnessed both life and death. But some say, not everyone who enters truly leaves. Nurses whisper about strange occurrences, equipment malfunctioning without reason, shadowy figures in empty hallways, and an eerie cold that lingers in certain rooms. But what happened that night was different, and the security footage proves it. At first, everything seemed normal. The patient lay motionless, monitors beeping steadily. But then, the heart rate monitors spiked, without explanation. The room's temperature plummeted, recorded dropping nearly 10 degrees in seconds. And then, the security camera glitched. For exactly 3 seconds, the screen turned to static. When it cleared, the patient was no longer lying down. He was sitting upright, his mouth open as if frozen mid-scream. But here's the strangest part. The doctors say he was still in a coma. The security footage was just the beginning. What happened inside room 306 that night still haunts the hospital staff to this day. At 3 a.m., the patient's monitors spiked. His heart rate shot up, erratic and unnatural, as if something unseen was interfering. The nurse on duty, confused, checked his vitals, but everything appeared normal, at least on paper. The temperature in the room, however, was a different story. It had dropped nearly 10 degrees within seconds. Then, the camera glitched. 3 seconds of static, just long enough to obscure what truly happened. But when the feed returned, the patient was no longer lying still. He was upright, his body stiff, his mouth frozen open in a silent scream. The nurse hesitated before stepping forward. Something felt wrong. The air in the room was heavy, suffocating. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that stretched unnaturally across the floor. As she reached for the patient's wrist to check his pulse, he suddenly gasped, loud and ragged, like someone who had been drowning. She stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a tray of instruments. The patient's eyes were open now, but they weren't focused. He stared past her, his pupils dilated, as if he was seeing something. Someone standing right behind her. The nurse turned sharply, but there was nothing there. Only the reflection in the window. Except something was off. The patient's reflection didn't match his real body. It sat still for a moment longer before tilting its head, while the patient remained motionless. Panic set in. The nurse rushed to the hallway, calling for help, but as soon as she stepped out of the room, the machines inside the ICU went berserk. Alarms blared, wires sparked, and the patient began convulsing. The power flickered, just for a second, but when it came back, everything went eerily silent. Doctors and staff stormed in, only to find the patient collapsed back onto the bed, completely still. His vitals? Normal? The room? Warm again. The monitors? Functioning as if nothing had ever happened. But when security checked the footage, those 3 seconds of static had turned into 10. 10 full seconds, completely erased. No one could explain it. The hospital's IT team found no errors, no malfunctions. It was as if that moment never existed. And yet, the nurse knew what she saw. That reflection in the window, that scream, that overwhelming sense of something watching. She refused to enter that room again. In fact, after that night, no staff member wanted to be assigned to room 306 ever again. Because whatever happened at 3 a.m., it wasn't over. No one could explain what happened that night, until we saw the security footage again. At first, it seemed normal. Just the nurse checking the patient, the sudden panic, the flickering lights. But then, we slowed it down, frame by frame. That's when we saw it. At exactly 3:02 a.m., during the 10-second blackout, something shifted in the window's reflection. It wasn't just a glitch. It wasn't a camera error. The patient's reflection moved on its own. While his real body lay frozen in terror, the reflection turned its head toward the camera. The motion was slow, unnatural, almost deliberate, and just before the blackout ended, the reflection smiled. The footage sent chills through the hospital staff. They watched it over and over, hoping to find a rational explanation. Maybe a shadow, a distortion, a trick of the light. But no matter how many times they analyzed it, the result was the same. The patient and his reflection were out of sync. Then came the audio review. A hospital technician enhanced the sound from that moment. At first, it was just static, electrical interference, but buried within the noise was something else. A whisper, just one word, stretched and distorted, almost impossible to decipher. But when slowed down, it became clear. Leave. The nurse, now shaken, refused to believe it. But something else confirmed her fears. When they checked the hospital's temperature logs, they found an anomaly. At 3:02 a.m., room 306 recorded a sudden drop of 20 degrees, only for a fraction of a second, before returning to normal. The hospital dismissed it as a malfunction, an unexplained glitch, but staff members knew the truth. The patient knew the truth. And that's why, the very next morning, he demanded a transfer. To this day, no one has stayed in room 306 for more than a single night. Not because of what happens inside, but because of what watches from the other side. Then, everything went wrong at once. The patient, who had been silent for minutes, suddenly let out a piercing scream. His heart monitor spiked. The machines around him glitched, numbers flashing erratically, alarms blaring. The lights overhead flickered wildly, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. The nurse stumbled back, pressing the emergency call button, but nothing happened. The intercom crackled with static, then cut out completely. The hallway outside, once dimly lit, was now shrouded in complete darkness. And then, the security cameras malfunctioned. One by one, the feeds distorted. Grainy interference, flickering images. But the feed from room 306 was still active. And what it showed should have been impossible. The patient was thrashing, struggling against something unseen, his hands clawing at his own throat. His reflection, still frozen in the window, was watching him. Then, in the final flicker of light, it moved. Not fast, not sudden. A slow, unnatural turn. It was looking at the camera now. A deep, guttural noise filled the room, a low, distorted frequency that made the walls vibrate. The security footage caught the moment when the temperature dropped again, this time to near freezing levels. The glass on the window fogged up instantly, and then something else appeared. A handprint, but it wasn't on the inside. It was on the other side of the glass. The nurse, now barely able to breathe, turned to run, but the door slammed shut on its own. The sound was deafening, echoing down the empty corridors. She pounded on it, screaming for help, but no one answered. The patient was convulsing, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. His eyes were wide, locked onto the window, onto whatever was watching him. And then, the reflection smiled again. The final moment caught on tape was pure chaos. The room shaking, the heart monitor flatlining, the security feed cutting to black. When backup finally arrived, the nurse was found curled in the corner, unable to speak. The patient? His vitals had stabilized, but he refused to say a word about what he saw. The only thing anyone knew for sure was this. After that night, room 306 was permanently sealed off. No more patients, no more nurses, no more unexplained incidents, or so they thought. But here's where things get even stranger. In the days that followed, hospital staff reported unexplainable occurrences near room 306. Equipment failures, lights flickering at the exact same time every night, 3:06 a.m. Security guards on night shifts claimed they heard faint whispers coming from the empty room, even though it had been locked and sealed. One janitor, tasked with cleaning the hallway, quit his job after witnessing something on the hospital's security feed. Footage that was immediately wiped from the system. When asked what he saw, he simply shook his head and muttered, "It looked back at me." And then came the historical connection. Digging deeper, investigators uncovered something chilling. Decades ago, long before it became a hospital, this building had a very different purpose. It was once a psychiatric facility, one with a dark past. Patients were subjected to cruel experiments, many of which were never documented. Some of them disappeared without a trace. One particular patient stood out, a man known only by his case number 306. His records? Missing. His diagnosis? Unknown. The only surviving detail was a cryptic note scrawled at the bottom of an old file. He doesn't cast a reflection anymore. The revelation sent chills down the spines of those who heard it. Could it be that whatever haunted room 306 was not just a presence, but a person who had never truly left? The hospital refuses to speak on the matter. The official statement? Technical malfunctions, staff misinterpretations, nothing out of the ordinary. But if that were true, why did they seal off the entire wing after this incident? Why were all security recordings from that night deleted? And why, after everything that happened, does room 306 still register temperature drops on the hospital's sensors every night at exactly 3:06 a.m.? One thing is certain, this story isn't over. There are too many unanswered questions, too many coincidences. But the real question is, would you dare step into room 306 to find out the truth? What we discovered next is even more terrifying. Next week, we'll be returning to the hospital, and this time, we'll uncover the secrets of room 306 for good. You won't believe what we find. If you want to see it first, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. And if you think you know what's lurking in room 306, drop your theories in the comments below. But be warned, some answers might change everything.